name is Sam. I'm the marketing and comms manager here at Fairygodboss. And Fairygodboss is the largest career community for women. Our mission is to improve the workplace by increasing transparency. We offer a ton of great free resources like anonymous company reviews, job listings, articles, virtual recruiting events, and so much more to help you succeed throughout your career. So before we get started, we will be taking questions at the end of today's webinar. You can leave them in the Q&A. You'll find that at the bottom of your screen. And you can feel free to leave questions anonymously or as yourself, and we'll get to as many as possible later. We're also recording today's webinar, and we'll send it out in a follow-up email along with some of Shivani's details and information. So don't worry if you miss anything or you miss a link. We will send it all directly to your inbox, and you'll have it later. Here with me today is Shivani Berry. Shivani is the CEO and founder of Ascend, which offers online leadership programs to empower women with the skills required to excel in their careers. She's a career coach and works with women from companies like LinkedIn, Pinterest, and Box to help them feel more confident in moving to leadership roles. And she was recently featured in Forbes. Prior to founding Ascend, Shivani was a product leader, and she has an MBA from Harvard Business School. Thanks so much for being here today, Shivani. Over to you.
Thanks for having me. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited about our session because I think this is a really important topic. And thanks so much for the intro, Sam, and the invite. Just a little quick background on me in addition to that is, when I face some of the challenges that you're probably facing right now. And, as an individual contributor, when I was a PM and then moving into becoming a people manager, and to be honest, I didn't really know what I was doing when I first got promoted. I didn't really know how to support my team. I struggled with getting buy-in, and I learned it by making so many mistakes and also getting the guidance that I needed to help me figure out what am I doing. And once I learned all of that, I felt so much more confident. I was able to move so much more quickly up in my career and take on larger leadership roles and not only impact my teams, but also executives and board of directors. And that's what really inspired me to create Ascend, because I wanted to create a really structured, high quality place for women to develop the key leadership skills that you need in order to grow and really support your teams and be successful in the roles that you're in. So like I said, I'm really excited for today. I hope you walk away with a lot of actionable takeaways. Keep the chat going, and we'll answer questions at the end, and I'll also follow up in the follow-up email with some resources for you. Let's dive in. So just kind of level setting, today we're gonna talk about how do you motivate teams. And right now there's obviously just a lot going on in the world. And so if you are feeling anxious or nervous or burnt out or overwhelmed, just know that's normal. So many of us are feeling like that. And just recognize that, we're in a current state where no one has had to deal with this before. And this is a topic that I spend a lot of time working with the women that I coach in our flagship leadership program, which I'll share more information about later on. So if you're feeling like an imposter, just recognize that you're not alone, and there are things you can do about it. And so we can dive deeper separately about that. So as we start talking about how do you support your team, I want to first align on what does your team actually want? What do they really need to be successful? What is the foundation? And there's a couple key things. First, they want to know that you have their back. They want to know that you're going to be invested in them. If they make a mistake, you're going to be behind them. And then the other thing they want to know is around that you care, that you want them to be successful. You have the best intentions. And finally, they want to know that to be heard. We all want our opinions valued, especially in moments of uncertainty or change. It becomes really important. And so taking all this and figuring out how can you do this, we're going to talk about today is how do you motivate and support your teams in uncertain times. And the learnings here can be applied in today's world, but also in the future when there's another situation. Maybe your company has an organization change. Maybe they're going through a hard time. These learnings are timeless. And these learnings are relevant whether you are a people manager or you're an individual contributor who has informal leadership roles, which we all do in one way or the other, or you want to move into leadership. These are all skills that you need to start developing now and can start applying already. So there are so many things to motivate your team. And I don't want to overwhelm you, so I've really boiled it down to the 5 must-dos. These are the critical things that you should really focus on to help you and your team be successful. And I'm going to go through each of them. I'm going to go through them in detail. And then at the end, we'll take questions around this. So the first must do is psychological safety. This is when you have the confidence that you and everyone on your team will not be punished or made fun of or embarrassed for asking a question, sharing an idea, or making a mistake. This was a concept that was created by Amy Edmondson at Harvard. And when Google did a massive study across their employees, they found that the best performing teams had one trait in common. They all felt psychological safety. Now, if you think about it, think about the times when you felt nervous about speaking up in a meeting. It was probably because you didn't want to be wrong or you didn't want to come across as stupid. Well, psychological safety reduces the risk of that happening. It creates a safe space and might even fully eliminate that fear for you in your team setting. That's why it's so important. If you remember one thing from today, I do hope you remember more, but if you just remember one thing, just remember psychological safety and focus on creating that in your team as a manager, but also as a team member, as a peer. So let's talk about what you can do. First, give everyone a voice. Allow discussion and debate. You should be doing this in one-on-one and in group meetings. Here is making sure people feel like their opinions are being heard. This is a really nice way to make sure you're creating an inclusive environment. For example, when I was a PM, one of the engineers on my team was a self-described introvert. She was not comfortable speaking up in group settings. So me and her created a plan that in meetings, if I noticed that she hadn't spoken up yet, towards the end of the discussion, I would just ask her, Melissa, do you have anything to add? And she could either say yes and share, or she'd say no, and it was totally fine. But this way it created a safe space for her to come into the conversation. And she didn't feel attacked because we had that trust there and we had that mutual agreement from before. So that's a way that you, even as a team member, can give someone a voice. Another idea is if you have people who are new to your team, it's hard being that new person. You want to make a good impression. And so you don't want to say something that could be wrong. And so, especially in this remote environment, it becomes even harder to get to know people. And so if you're in a team meeting and you notice that person's not saying anything, ask them for their opinion. Jackie, do you have anything to add? I'd love to hear what you have to say. But no worries at all if you don't. I know all of this is new and I'm sure it just takes a while to get ramped up, so we can always chat about it later. That's a really nice way to invite people into the discussion. Then, over communicating expectations. So being really clear about where the team needs to go. What is the end goal? Because then the team can work backwards to figure out what do they need to do to make it happen. And we'll dive deeper into this when in a couple minutes. Then overdoing thank yous. So this might seem simple, but actually in moments of stress or when there's a lot of change, we get so caught up and we tend to focus just on the bad things that are going wrong. But recognizing people for their hard work, for good work, for taking on things is really important and makes people feel valued. And so thanks for your help with the project. Thanks for sending me that deliverable. Thanks for speaking up in that meeting. I know that was not an easy thing to say. The more you encourage this, the better people will feel, and they will likely do good behavior even more because they're getting recognized for it. Then being vulnerable. Vulnerability means show your fallibility as a leader. Share when you're feeling stressed or anxious, or when you made a mistake, or when you don't know something. To be honest, I used to think of vulnerability as a weakness. I felt like if I showed when I was concerned about something, I would be seen as not as a strong leader. In reality, when you actually have these conversations, it makes it okay for other people to share, because we all have these kind of feelings. So when I was a product leader, my team was responsible for revamping our core product experience. This meant a lot of visibility to the executives, to the board of directors. It was our top company priority. So as you can imagine, a lot of pressure also. And so when my team would ask me, do you think we can achieve our OKRs? I would just be like, oh, of course we can. And I thought I was protecting them by saying it. Though in reality, I was also stressed about it. But I realized that my team could see through this. They didn't think I was being authentic. And to be honest, that lost the trust that they had in me. When I changed and I was more open, when I communicated, you know what, I am stressed about this. Or when they would ask me, can we hit our OKRs? And I was able to say like, yeah, they are ambitious, But here's why I think we can achieve them. That was a game changer. That was such a turning point in our relationship. The team was more productive. I had better relationships with them. We had more free-flowing conversations. That's why it's so important to be vulnerable. Now, if you're thinking, well, how can I be vulnerable? Because especially as women, we often have the danger of being seen as weak or fragile or too emotional when we're vulnerable. If this is the challenge that you're facing or thinking about right now, here are some things you should think about. First, build your credibility. If you are known as a really great performer, then the conversation when you do express vulnerability won't be about, well, she's always stressed about something. Instead, it'll be like, she did a really good job in that project, or she's our go-to resource for our expert on this area. So establish your credibility, do great work. Second, reflect. Figure out, okay, what are you hesitant about sharing? And what is the downside if you share this? Sometimes it's not that much of a downside if you share it. So just put yourself out there and see what happens. Really, to that point, the third thing you should do is be vulnerable with people that you trust and see what happens. Try it out a couple of times, get feedback. And that way you can decide how much more vulnerable do you want to be? Who do you want to be vulnerable around? One of the women I coach, she is a new mom. And when she recently went back to work, when we were talking about this topic, she asked me, you know what? Last week I actually had an incident when I was hopping onto a meeting and, we make the small talk, how are you? And her baby had just pooped in her lap right before she hopped onto the meeting. She's like, I just wasn't sure if I should share that when people said, how are you? And, that's a judgment call. But my recommendation is try sharing that and see how people react. Usually situations like that, actually shows where you're coming from, gives more context, it humanizes you, builds that personal connection. So I'd recommend trying it out. And the other nice thing is what I found when I was vulnerable, it made me feel happier. It made me feel freer because I wasn't showing up as two different personalities, the Shivani at work and the Shivani at home who was actually stressed about what we were working on. And the last thing you can do around building psychological safety is assuming best intentions. Especially when we're uncertain about things, when we're stressed, we can often be quick to judge and just assume like, well, I don't understand why that person did that. And so if someone responds to you, especially maybe a lot of your communication right now is written, and obviously there's no tone associated with that, so it's up to you how to perceive it. Well, take the higher road and assume best intentions. If you feel like someone's being curt when they're writing to you, let it go. Just assume that they don't mean to do that, or just follow up with them and get more information instead of letting it linger more and making it a worse situation. To help you do this, ask open-ended and non-judgmental questions. Here's a few examples. So I'm curious to know what you're thinking about. Can you please share more? This is compared to, I don't get what you're saying. The I'm curious is much more welcoming and allows a better conversation. And I'm going to send you this list of questions in the follow-up email, so you don't have to worry about writing it down. And there are many other questions you can ask that you can always refer back to. In these moments, you can also just acknowledge what's in your mind, what's probably in their mind too. I know the situation sucks. I know this is hard. I wish we could be there in person. Recognizing that makes people feel heard. It makes it feel like you're on the same team. Allows better conversation. So these are starting points for you to build a psychological safety. And you can figure out which ones are the right ones for you. And again, you can do this even as an individual contributor, even as a peer, to help create the best environment on your team. Then a big one is you need to align on expectations. Especially when there's been a lot of change, as there has been in the past few months. Your company priorities might have changed. Maybe your team priorities have changed. So it's important to have these conversations. And so here, you want to first think about, how does the current state impact my roles and responsibilities? Do I know what's expected of me from my manager? How do I know that? Sometimes we think we know, but it's actually just in our head. We've never actually had a conversation with our manager around this. And if you're like, oh yeah, wait, that's me, then make a note to have that conversation ASAP. On the flip side, thinking about it with your team. Does my team know what I expected of them? And if I haven't had an explicit conversation, then okay, wait, I should actually go have that conversation. Then aligning on what are the team goals or the project goals. And then team norms. All of this has to change, or at least part of it. So on the project goals, here are some questions you can use to help you have this conversation. The first one is my personal favorite. What does success look like? This question is really great because when you ask this question, not only do you get the formal definition of how your team is being measured, but you also get this like nuanced answer from the person you're asking this question to. You get to understand what are the things they particularly care about. And then you can make sure you're achieving that when you're actually performing on the goal. You can make sure your team is operating according to that. Then there's many other questions you can ask and play around with. And again, I'm going to send this to you so you have this handy to pull from. A question, for example, what trade-offs do we have to make? This question is really great when maybe you're working with someone and you're not sure if this is their priority. Or maybe they have a lot going on in their personal life and you're not sure if like you should impose this on them. And so this is a nice way to make people, allows you to have collaboration. Let's figure out together how we have to deprioritize things. If this timeline makes sense, if the project scope makes sense. Now, here we're talking about projects, but it can be really anything. Maybe you change your process. Maybe you're hiring you're a recruiter and you're hiring a candidate. The goals of that need to be changed. Maybe you're in sales or business development, whatever it is. You can have all these questions to make sure people are aligned. Then aligning on team norms. So like I said, the way we work probably has changed for you. You're now remote. For many of you, that change happened overnight. And you've probably adjusted to it a bit now, but still like things are still evolving. And for many companies, there's not a clear end in sight. It's TBD when you go back to the office. And even putting in addition to this current situation, in the future, as things change, as your company grows, as priorities shift, you need to realign on team norms. So some things you should be thinking about on the communication front, you should be setting boundaries. So especially if you're working from home, there's often not a clear distinction between work and home because you're not longer leaving an office. So set really clear boundaries to avoid getting messages at all times of the day. I know, especially right now, I feel like a lot of people are having Zoom fatigue. And so setting clear timelines like around when will you have meetings, when can you send emails, when are you just going to turn off? Because it's important to recognize this is a marathon, not a sprint. Then you want to role model that behavior for your team. So just if you say, I'm going to turn off my email after 7, actually do that. Because you can't expect other people to do it if you're not doing it. Then figure out what the best practices for the communication channels are. So being thoughtful around, okay, do I need input from this person instantaneously, or do I need a more thoughtful response? Is it a more detailed response or simple? That will determine should you Slack them or similar chatting app, or should you send them an email or have a meeting with them? Do I need timely response? Like just think about all these different factors will help you figure out what's the right communication channel. Because so many of us are just getting bombarded with so many notifications from chats and emails, and figure out what's the right place. Maybe for you, it's having a Google document or similar tool, which has a centralized source of truth for all updates on what your team is working on. And then you want to figure out how can your team communicate with you? So usually when you have a meeting, it feels like it has to be 30 minutes or an hour. But what if your team just has a quick question that takes 5 minutes? Well, we no longer have the ability to just walk up to someone's desk or run into them in the hallway or when we're in the kitchen grabbing a snack. And so here, make it okay to even schedule a meeting for 5 minutes. If you're comfortable with it, have people be able to text you or call you for a quick question. Consider hosting office hours. So this is where you block out an hour or maybe 30 minutes a day, and people can just hop on, chat with you for a couple of minutes, catch up, get the support that they need from you. And it's really easy, no friction. And then finally, around this communication piece, feedback still needs to happen. Things are going to go wrong. Things are going to go well. You need to be able to engage. So right now, figure out from your team, what's the best way to deliver the feedback? Maybe it's in writing. Maybe it's in having a video call, or maybe it's a phone call or a video, like a Zoom call, but the video off. Whatever makes the recipient most receptive. And then process changes. So revise or eliminate existing processes. Figure out what needs to happen and identify new processes that are required, such as maybe doing a daily stand-up where you go through and you run with your team around, like everyone gives a quick update on what they've been working on yesterday, what's the progress they made, the problems they're facing, and what's your plan for today. And then you can decide, do you need to dig into a certain problem even more with the entire team or maybe a subgroup of the team. So put in the chat if you have other ideas that you've used for team norms, just so others can see for inspiration, specifically around like new processes or how you've done, or if you do something like office hours, around just keep the team like easily communicating around project updates or work updates. Then a big one is over communicating. This is what I was mentioning around, and so here it's, people usually fall into two different spectrums, or there's like two ends of the spectrum. When there's a big change or there's uncertainty, there's one end of the spectrum where the person is like, this is great, we were set up for this. We're so lucky that we had this like tragedy or like issue happen. We were ready for this. This is gonna be like, show us well. Don't do that. That feels very tone deaf, not authentic. On the flip side, there's people who just don't say anything at all. They're completely silent. And don't do that either. That doesn't give people comfort. Instead, be transparent, be honest, and communicate frequently. In one-on-ones, group meetings, figure out what's the right cadence. Keep the flow of information going, even if you're like, there is no update, just so people know that there's no update. So things that you should keep in mind here first, don't bluff. Don't make things up. That is the easier thing to do because it's uncomfortable having these conversations. And so instead of that, be transparent with what you know and what you don't know. If your team is asking you, well, is there going to be a layoff? And if you don't know the answer to that, tell them that you don't know the answer to that. And acknowledge that this is a tough situation. I know this isn't the answer that you really want to hear. I know that this sucks. I know I'm putting you in a tough spot. Use that to acknowledge the current situation, but don't bluff. You work with smart people and they will see through that. Maybe they won't see it through immediately, but eventually they will. And that will erode trust really, really quickly. Instead, you want to practice authentic leadership and building that trust and showing that you respect them and you know they can handle the truth. So when you do tell them the truth, you always want to explain the context and the rationale. And so here, sharing, okay, well, if there is a hiring freeze, why is that? If the project deadline got extended, why is that? Studies show that using the word because significantly increases compliance. So blah, 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 because of this reason. Simple as that, increases compliance. So start getting the habit of doing this. And in the leadership program, we spend a lot of time building a habit around this. How do you get buy-in? How do you get people invested in your ideas? Bring them through your thought process. We spend a ton of time around this. Some other things you should be thinking about is, how much information should I give? That's a popular question I get. So here, unfortunately, there's no perfect answer. You have to just figure out what's right for the situation, for the person you're talking to. But some guidelines you can do. First, trust your instincts. If you're not sure, then lean on over communicating. And if you're trying to figure out, okay, well, how should I balance being optimistic versus realistic? I'd really encourage you to think about, well, what does being optimistic mean? What does that actually get me? Most likely, if you are being falsely optimistic, you're just going to erode trust. And that you only get some short-term gains. You're going to lose credibility over time. So here's a worksheet. We're going to share it with you to help you communicate the updates. So you want to this will help you think through, like, hey, what are the unknowns? What message do I want to share? How do I want to share it? Also think about, how do I want the people to feel when they hear the message? Do I want them to feel hopeful? Do I want them to feel excited, positive, comforted? Do I want them to feel like we're on fire and we need to get moving and really deliver? All of this will impact how you share the message and what are the questions people will be giving you. So this worksheet will help you prepare for that. And then finally, just repeat. Repeat your message many, many times so people fully understand it. We have really short attention spans. And so, especially in moments when there's a lot going on, or when there's stress, I feel like our attention spans even become shorter. And so make sure you repeat what the goals are, what the expectations are, how are things progressing, what's going wrong, what's going well. Do this in writing and one-on-one meetings and group meetings. You should do this at all levels. So do it with your team, do it with your peers, do it with senior people. If you are an individual contributor, you also have to keep doing this. Everything we're talking about, you need to do also. And as a manager, it is very, very important that you keep doing it, especially with your team, so they know what's expected. And this will actually be comforting to them and helpful. Then a big one is building connection. It makes us feel more, it gives us a sense of belonging, and it helps improve morale. So some things that you can do here are around, first, celebrate the wins. And don't just celebrate the wins about what good looks like, but also don't just celebrate the end results, but also celebrate what is good behavior. What is the process that it took to get you there? So for example, of course, celebrate when a product feature gets launched. Celebrate when you complete a new process. Celebrate when you close a new customer. But also celebrate when on the project, someone catches the bug and they fix it. When they build a really strong cross-functional relationship. When your sales representative handles a customer objection really well. By also celebrating the process and good behavior, you signal to the team that it's not just the end result that matters. It is also how you got there. And that's how you create good habits. But when we get really busy, we just tend to just celebrate the end results. And that doesn't actually set up your team for success. Then do virtual happy hours and lunches. So maybe you give everyone credit and they can order whatever they want for lunch and you all eat together at the same time. Maybe you order everyone pizza, whatever it is, like do this, do game sessions. Often if you have trouble getting people to show up to these kind of social events, having an agenda helps, or having something where it's like really engaging, such as like game night helps to drive that level of engagement. And then showing your pets, your children, your home, because now, you know, let's face it, personal life and work life has really been blurred. You've probably been at meetings, whether it's your children or your pets or someone else's children and pets are showing up. And so let's embrace it. Let's make it people may feel more comfortable around it. And so maybe you do something of like, bring your kids or bring your pets to the meeting day. Maybe you're doing like an MTV crib style where you show everyone around your home and everyone takes turns doing that. Get creative with this, have fun with it. The one thing I will say here is if, you know, while this helps create an inclusive environment, it's also important to recognize that not everyone might be comfortable blurring the lines so much. So check with your team if they are comfortable doing something like this or not. I'd say most of the time people are, but you just want to double check to make sure everyone is feeling really comfortable. And then something else you can do is having virtual coffee chats or walks. Because we're in meetings back to back and things feel super busy right now, it is very easy to cancel these, what we might think is like casual chat catch-ups. But in reality, this is really important for relationship building. People do things for people that they like. And so this is a nice way to build rapport. And get creative with this. For example, bring your own beverage when you both can drink a coffee or tea or whatever together. If it's safe for you to go for a walk, then go outside together. So you're both holding your phone and just walking and catching up. Just having a change of environment can be really helpful. And I encourage you to do this with people that you work with actively right now, but also with other stakeholders who you know are important for the areas that you work in or for your own career growth. And keep those meetings. Maybe you just have them less frequently. Maybe they're shorter, but use them to touch base and figure out, sure, what are you working on? What are the challenges you're facing? And they can share the same thing. So you have that information. Especially in a remote environment, you basically only know what you get out of meetings or people sharing and messaging. We no longer have those hallway run-ins. And so in order to facilitate that, you need to do these more informal conversations also. So throw in the chat other ideas that you've done to help build connections with your team. I'd love to just see, and these can all be inspirational for all of us. And while you're doing that, jumping into just recognizing how important empathy is. Empathy is really putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Understanding, for example, that these are tough times, understanding that some people might have a more difficult time than others, and doing what you can to support them. Recognizing that it is okay to not be performing at the same level as you were maybe 6 months ago or 12 months ago, and making your team know that that's also okay. And if you've asked your team, what can I do to support you? And they're like, oh, nothing. But you know that they are actually starting to feel burnt out, but they're not giving you information, then be more specific about that question. You know, I know that you have kids at home and you have to make sure they are able to attend their like Zoom school lessons. Is there anything that we need to change around for meeting times? Is there anything on this project that we should think about? Is there a specific part of this project that you need additional support on? Asking more specific questions or even coming up with proposals yourself can open up the discussion more, can make them feel more open to sharing, and because they'll recognize that you're not just asking for the sake of asking it, but you truly do care and you truly do want to support them. So, oh, I like all these ideas. Trivia night, stand-ups, quiz, love it. Keep sharing if you have more. And the last thing I'd say that you should really focus on is self-care. I know you might be thinking like, okay, self-care, this is so cliche. But before you judge, just think about how often do you actually do this? I think we're often very good at taking care of other people, but not so good at prioritizing ourselves. And self-care is super important because it makes sure that you show up as your best self. And if you show up as your best self, that's the only way you can help others. So remind yourself to recharge, take care of yourself, get that rest. And you have to figure out what makes sense for you. For me, I find yoga really relaxing, physically and mentally. On the other hand, I've been really bad at getting outside. And so there might be a couple of days without me going outside. And because of that, my step count is abysmal, embarrassingly abysmal, very low. And so I need to be better at that. And so figuring out like what is the right thing for you. Maybe it's taking a day off from work. Maybe it's cutting Fridays short. Whatever it is, like recognize that and actually create time for it. And I'd love to just hear what are the self-care activities that you've done. So again, throw it in the chat. Let's share, inspire others, encourage others to go do it. And so while we're doing that, I want to just recap the 5 must-dos to motivate and support your team. Psychological safety, align on expectations, over-communicating, building that connection, and self-care. And I want to make sure you walk away from today actually implementing these learnings. And so I have a 30-day challenge for you. We're going to take a couple minutes and write down one thing you're going to do in the next 30 days related to what we talked about to take care of yourself, to be able to motivate your team. So as a reminder, it can be related to any of these 5 must-dos. Maybe for you, you're like, my team doesn't have psychological safety. So I'm going to practice being more vulnerable. I'm going to make it a habit of asking open-ended questions. Maybe you're like, you know, I actually realize I'm not really clear on the expectations with my team. I'm going to go have that conversation. I'm going to build connection. I'm going to plan us a happy hour or a lunch or a game night. Or maybe it's about self-care. Yeah, I recognize I've been feeling really burnt out and I'm going to make sure I'm going to take a bath today or read or go for a walk or a run, whatever it is for you, just sleep in. So let's just take a couple of minutes, write down what your goal is for 30 days, and then post in the chat so we can all see and help hold you accountable. And also just post it somewhere where you can keep track of it for the next 30 days. And maybe even consider creating a calendar invite to remind yourself about this goal. So yeah, let's think for a couple of minutes and then we'll come back together. And then afterwards we'll do Q&A. So one more minute and then we'll come back together. Just a reminder, put your challenge that you're committing to in the chat so we can also be in a loop around it. I like that, Lisa. Like the breath, just checking on your team, how everything's going. And yeah, the walking ones are key. Oh, hi, Asta. Bi-weekly update, virtual ones. I love all these. Perfect. And so, yeah, to close out, before we just continue, finish up your challenge and just post it in the chat. And then remember to write it somewhere else also so you can remember it. And so before we jump into Q&A, I want to just share with you if you found today's session helpful and if you want to have your ideas heard and valued, if you want to feel more confident, get buy-in and be able to really influence that work, and also just really accelerate your growth at your career, then I invite you to join Ascend's Leadership Program. It's a 6-week online program where you'll learn with a community of women to develop the skills such as getting buy-in, overcoming imposter syndrome, advocating for yourself, storytelling, creating personal brand, these critical skills that you really need to lead and influence at work. And so the way the program is set up, that every week we'll go through a new module. You'll have video lessons that you watch at your own pace. Then we'll come together for an hour and a half once a week as a group where you'll get coaching from me. You'll go into breakout discussions with your peers. We'll go through case studies. You can bring your challenges. You can ask questions. And then you'll have exercises that you apply directly to your work, because the best way most, if not all of us learn is by doing. And that's a huge focus of the program. So what makes it really unique is a couple of different things. The first is a focus on actionable learnings. So here, everything we will do will have a clear step-by-step playbook of what to do, including how do you handle situations when things don't go well, because that does happen and that's the most stressful part of it. And then our big thing is around community also. And so you're going to be in a safe space with other women where you can talk about challenges you're facing, and we also cover some topics such as biases that we might face as a female leader, being the only female in the room. And this community has been so powerful, just getting to connect with people who are going through similar challenges as you and journey. And you have access to this community during the program, but also beyond. And you actually get to connect with even the past alumni from the program, also on an ongoing basis. And the third thing that makes it really unique is the accountability. Because most of us have the best intentions to develop a habit, but then just day-to-day gets in the way. And so we've designed the program to help make sure you do achieve your goals, and we help keep you on track to make sure you get the results that you really came in looking for. And so we've had women from really great companies such as these and so much more go through the program, and coming out of it, they felt more confident. They've been comfortable speaking up in meetings, getting buy-in, overcoming imposter syndrome. Several of them have actually credited the program in helping them get promoted, which has been really amazing, being able to lead their teams better. And so we've been featured in Forbes also. And so if this is something that's really interesting to you, and if you want to start investing in yourself, then I invite you to join our program. The next one starts on September 1st. And typically the fee is $1,999, but because you're attending today, you get a discount of $500 off. And there are really limited spots available, so I encourage you to sign up as soon as possible. You'll learn with a group of about 25 to 30 people, women, so it's super small, just a really engaging community. And typically there's an application process for this, but because you're here, we're going to waive that application process for you. And so we'll send out the link to reserve your seat in the follow-up email, and you can always let me know if you have any questions. With that, let's jump into Q&A. So,
So much, Shivani. And as a reminder, you can leave questions in the Q&A. You can leave them as yourself or anonymously. I already saw one come through, so we'll get started with that one. But feel free to leave whatever comes to mind there. We had one question come through earlier that said, I have a team member who is suspicious or skeptical of individual thank yous and assumes that they're due to meetings where we're actually instructed to do this. I've assured this person that we do this with many people as we notice things and they're indicators of potential leaders, but how else can I reassure this person?
yeah, good question. And before I answer that, I just pulled back up the 5 must-dos just as to jog everyone's memory. So if you have questions around any of this, like this question around a specific situation that you're facing, you're struggling with, like, how do I apply this to my role? Please ask. I want this to be as valuable as possible for you. So jumping into that question, I think it's important to, one, ask them why do they feel like these thank yous are so inauthentic now that you've already shared with them that this is something you're doing with everyone, and kind of explain the context around it. And maybe even asking them around, to me, that almost, I wonder, like, is that an insecurity in themselves? Like, do they not think that they are up to par? And so just asking them, like, why do they have so much doubt around it? And you could, ask questions just like, I really want to support you and you are doing great work on this. And I want to make sure you also recognize the value. So maybe you can just share with me, like, what is your, is there something that you're concerned about or nervous about? Let's just have an open conversation. That's how I would tackle that, and just get more intel that way, and then figure out how to, like, take the conversation from there.
Awesome. Kind of similar on that note, but if I know an employee of mine is struggling right now, I've asked them about it and they won't open up, how do I deal with this situation? How do I get through to them?
Yeah, I think one, just being honest about that and be like, I really do want to support you, but I can only help you to the extent that you're able to share. Like, I can't read minds. And so I think just being honest about that, and then of course actions speak louder than words. Sometimes we're afraid of voicing it because we don't want to come across as weak. We don't want to come across as like not being able to handle it, especially in an environment right now when maybe job stability isn't always guaranteed for people or is more up in the air. So use the questions that that we'll be sending over to you. So asking, on a project, what are the trade-offs we need to make sure that you're supported and we can deliver X on time? Where are you getting stuck? How can I better support you? How do you think we should approach this? What do you think we can potentially de-scope? How do you think we should change your team processes? So just brainstorming with them. And so you're not positioning as ways necessarily as like they're forcing it or you're forcing it. Just like you're just having an open conversation and then guiding from there. And then the other thing is, if you see that they're struggling and you can see where they're struggling, then be proactive about it. Be like, how about we push out the deadline to another week? How about this other person takes over this part of the project? And that will often make people feel more receptive if you're coming with more deliberate proposals.
Awesome. All right, last call for questions, and a little fun one that I'm curious about. Shivani, do you have any other examples of like fun team bonding activities that teams can use to kind of get people, quote unquote, outside of the office, but on a more informal basis to connect with one another?
Yeah, in remote setting or
yes, remote.
Okay.
I guess the only thing we can do.
Yeah. Other ideas. And so I think the games have been really popular. So doing like a trivia night or something. I've also seen people do like, show me one thing from your office. And so people will bring like their notebook or a hat that they wear or like a random pen that they use. One time I heard someone doing this and they were living on a farm at that time. So they like went and showed like the cow that was outside. So, you can get creative with it. And so those can be different ways to do that. Also just figuring out like 21 questions, but keep it PC. And so, and then maybe sharing like childhood photos. Those are always really cute to look at. And maybe it's even like, you just put it up and everyone has to guess who's who. And so playing a game that way. And then one question, and some things you can do in your meetings in general is going around and asking, when you have a team meeting, having a bit of an icebreaker to ease things in. And so one week, what you could do is ask a question: what is a recent thing that you've done that you're really proud of? So forcing us to celebrate the wins. And then the next week, flip it and be like, what's a recent failure that you've made? So acknowledging that we all make mistakes and it's completely okay. And so that's a really nice way just to foster that team building. And make sure when you ask these questions, you yourself are being really vulnerable. You're really embodying the behavior that you want your team to do.
Awesome. Well, it looked like somebody else asked if the event will be available for replay. Yes, we'll be sending out the recording later today, so be sure to look out for it. It will also be available on the past events page on the Fairygodboss website. Again, it will be up by the end of the day today, so don't check in 5 minutes. It probably won't be there, but you can check tomorrow. It will be there. Looks like that is about all of our questions. So I want to say thank you to Giovanni one more time. It was a really excellent presentation, and I think we all learned a lot.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And thank you to everyone for joining. You'll have my contact info for afterwards, so feel free to just reach out to me with any other questions. I'd love to support you however I can. And stay safe and well, everyone. Good luck with motivating teams. Now you have a lot of good resources to put in place. And yeah, let me know if I can ever help you with anything.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone, and we'll catch you at the next one. Bye.
Bye.